Good morning. Welcome to yet another session of A Sniper's Perspective. I've been getting a lot of emails from folks. And again, I really appreciate how many people have been listening to this simple little podcast I've been putting out. Now I had over 10,000 people actually listen to various clips and things like that. And I really do appreciate it. So today I'm going to be talking about some shooting tips and tricks. I will not be talking about combat. That's something that I reserve for only talking about combat veterans. But I will talk about shooting. I've had some folks ask me about some shooting tips and tricks, and I said, sure, we can talk about that. And so one of the things that I do want to talk about is what it's like to shoot and learn to shoot like a sniper, and hopefully you'll take some stuff from this that will be a little bit helpful. Now, this is a sniper school graduation. You can see me. I'm the handsome one there on third from the right on the bottom. I look like everybody else. I counted 16 of us graduated. I think 29 started, so fairly small class, pretty high attrition rate. They've had much higher attrition rates actually after this, but we graduated 16. I think we may have actually lost one more after this picture was taken. I'm rocking my brand new hat. I want to thank Doc Brown. He'll be my guest this weekend. You get to learn about being a special amphibious reconnaissance corpsman. He's one of the funniest people you'll ever meet. He's got some amazing pictures, some amazing stories. I've known Bill now for, 25 years. We were recon instructors together many years ago. So it should be a really, really interesting podcast. So one of the things I want to do to get this thing started is, as we're going forward, there are a couple of organizations that really help the brothers and sisters in my community. Two of those, if you're interested in donating, Recon Sniper Foundation.org. They sponsor a lot of events. Here's a shooting competition. I'm sure they probably won't mind. I pilfered this picture from their website, Recon Sniper Foundation.org. And then at the bottom, you've got the Marine Recon Foundation, reconfoundation.org as well. Both of these have stepped up for a number of brothers and sisters and families of recon Marines and snipers that have fallen on hard times, maybe lost a loved one, things like that. So if you get a chance or you're so inclined, certainly feel that you can always donate or just check out their webpage. One of the more interesting aspects when people ask me about being a sniper is they believe that, snipers are the pinnacle of shooting, technology and expertise. And oftentimes people are surprised to learn that that's not the case at all in any way, shape, or form. If you really, really want to see where the best shooters are, you just have to look to, our civilian brothers and sisters. The civilians really set the bar and they establish the standards when it comes down to not just shooting, but the technology, the calibers, everything else. In fact, the most, revered sniper, arguably, in U.S. military history, Gunnery Sergeant Carlos Hathcock, started life as a champion shooter. That's him at the top at the Camp Perry Nationals, winning the Camp Perry Cup 1,000-yard nationals before he ever went to Vietnam. And then, of course, he went to Vietnam. That's a picture of him on the bottom, where he became obviously one of the deadliest snipers in American history. And even Chris Kyle, with his amazing combat history and everything else, gave credibility or gave credence to Gunny Hathcock and, called him out. So when we look at where shooting comes from and this, it really is the civilians. So they teach you how to shoot well in the Marine Corps. All Marines, can shoot pretty darn well, make no mistake. And then you go to sniper school, they teach you to shoot a heck of a lot better. But I would be lying if I said that snipers are the best shots out there. And I'll give you a couple of examples that you'll probably get a kick out of. And I'm sure these folks won't mind if I share their pictures. So the gentleman you're looking at in the middle, in between Gronk and Terry Bradshaw, is a guy by the name of Otto Hecht, Master Gunnery Sergeant Otto Hecht. Now, Otto there was the senior enlisted Marine in all of Marine Corps Special Operations. He was Master Gunnery Sergeant Otto Hecht, retired almost 2 years ago this summer. 30 some odd years ago, I was a sniper at 3.6, and this 6'4", probably 165-pound Lance Corporal walked up and said, "Hey, I want to be a sniper." I put him through the indoctrination. If you saw my previous podcast, and his name was Otto Hecht. He passed, and he actually became my spotter. So he and I went to combat in Somalia. He was my spotter. I was the sniper. But even then, he could outshoot me every day of the week. He could shoot circles around me. He was not yet a qualified sniper. He was just a country boy from Virginia that could hunt, but he could outshoot me every day of the week. He then went on to be a drill instructor, I believe a marksmanship instructor, and again, the senior enlisted Marine in all of MARSOC. I got to go to his retirement ceremony, and one of the proudest days of my life, quite frankly, is he got up and gave me a little bit of a shout out and how I impacted his career. And to think I had just a small measure of influence on this man's career is pretty impressive. But again, even before he was a sniper, he was shooting circles around the other snipers. So when we look at where the shooting comes from, again, it comes from the civilian side. And just because you're a sniper doesn't mean you're the greatest shooter. Out of those 16 snipers that graduated, from a shooting perspective, I was probably about number 15 and a half out of my class. I was that, if this had been a medical school class, I would have been that doctor you would not want to go to if you had a terminal disease. I would be that doctor you'd go to if you had like a rash on your arm or something. Okay. So we're going to talk a little bit about zero range, things like that. Let me digress a bit. We're not going to talk a whole lot about platforms and rifles here too much. I'm going to save that for another podcast. But one thing I will tell you is if you're getting into shooting and you're relatively new, it's important to remember, if you're shooting a trash weapon, and I'm not saying that to, denigrate anybody or whatever, but if you're shooting something that is not a very accurate weapon, you're not going to be able to shoot it very accurately. Okay. So firearms, rifles in particular, are measured on what's called minutes of angle. So think about it this way. And again, we're not going to go too deep into this in this particular podcast. A minute of angle is a angular measurement. So you can think about it as roughly 1 inch per 100 yards. So a rifle that is guaranteed to shoot 1 minute of angle means if you were to put that rifle in a vise and shoot, an infinite number of rounds, statistically, something like 99.99% of those rounds would shoot within a cone within roughly a 1 inch group per 100 yards. So at 100 yards, they almost all land within 1 inch. At 200 yards, 2 inches, so on and so forth. And again, that's in a perfect world in a vise. Now, as human beings, we don't always shoot perfectly. Certainly, we have weather conditions, things like that. So if you're shooting a 1 minute of angle rifle, the best you could hope to shoot out of that, quite frankly, would be 1 minute of angle. That also accounts for having very, very high quality ammo that can shoot 1 minute of angle. So when you start adding all these factors up, it's possible that the platform plus the ammo and everything else, that rifle may only be capable of shooting, say, 2 minutes of angle or 2 inches per 100 yards. So if you go to the range and find yourself shooting, a 2 or 3 inch group, you get frustrated. And it could be the limitations of the platform you're shooting and not simply your shooting ability. So it is important to have a good platform. But one of the things I tell newer shooters is don't go out and spend $10,000 on, a super high-end platform. There is a point of diminishing returns. Again, we'll spend some time on this on a later podcast. Get a decent platform, decent glass, right? A good scope, and then spend your money on great ammo and learning how to actually shoot hours and hours and hours behind that rifle. So as we get into shooting, one of the things that I'm asked about pretty frequently is the idea of zero. What does zero mean? Well, zero quite frequently means it's the calibration of the scope to the rifle so that there's zero elevation and declination. It means that where you point and put those crosshairs, it means that is exactly where the bullet is going to hit at a given range. And the reason that's important is, and this sounds strange to people, if I were to put a rifle, ignoring the curvature of the earth, point it absolutely flat, and I were to shoot a bullet out of it and drop a bullet at the same time, those bullets would hit the ground at exactly the same time. And the reason for that is even though the one bullet may be flying at 3,000 feet per second, gravity is still acting on that the same way as it is the one that I dropped. So the one may drop at 2,000 feet or 2,000 meters or whatever, but it's still going to hit the ground. And again, theoretically, we've got wind and stuff like that, but theoretically, gravity acts on it the same way. So what we need to do is elevate the muzzle of the rifle so that we can shoot at distance. So we end up having to zero that rifle to certain distances, point of aim, point of impact. Think about an artillery piece, right? Cannons. They have to elevate that so that they can shoot longer distances. There's a reason they can't just put them flat. We do the same thing with rifles. So you zero your rifles for a given range. And so if you look at it, most snipers will zero their rifles somewhere about 300 yards, depending if they're doing extremely long range shooting. Some people may zero their rifles at 500 yards. It just depends, but that's what we call zero, the zero range. It means point of aim, point of impact. That means that if you're shooting closer, the round's going to hit higher. If you're shooting further, the round's going to hit lower. And so you have to adjust for that. That's what we call the zero range. Next, we have what I think is probably one of the most important things that people tend to forget. It's what we call natural point of alignment, natural body position. You'll hear a bunch of different terms on this, but what it means is it's any position, the arrangement of your relaxed body so that the rifle muzzle naturally rests at the same point. Okay, so natural body position, natural point of alignment. You'll hear differing terms for this, but there's a great way to test for it. So say, for example, you're shooting on a bench, okay? And so you've got your rifle up there and you're shooting on a bench. What you do is you exhale, you close your eyes, you relax, you open your eyes. If your scope and everything is still on that bullseye, you've got natural body alignment. If not, what you don't do is you don't muscle that scope over there, because when you muscle it over there, you're having to tense those muscles, and that's going to reflect in your shooting. So what you do is you move your whole body, you move your rear end, you move your whole body, and you repeat. You relax, open your eyes. And when you have those crosshairs perfectly aligned with the bullseye, you've got natural body alignment or natural position, natural body position. Again, there's a bunch of different terms for it. And the only thing that should be happening is when you take a breath, you should see the scope probably move up and down a little bit, but it should be perfectly aligned. And that's one of the most important things that you can do to ensure good, accurate shooting. It does take a little bit of practice, but for every position you're used to shooting at, you should really practice on getting that natural body alignment with your target. And that's going to help your shooting probably more than just about anything. And I see a lot of people go out there and they start muscling. And you can oftentimes tell that from their target, because you'll see if they've got good trigger control, good breath control, but oftentimes you'll see that the rounds will be impacting on one side or the other consistently, and they don't know why. And when they come out and they reload and they go back, you'll see it'll change again. And that means that they don't have good natural body position. So having that good natural body position, probably the number one thing that I see that people really need to work on. That, and I would say trigger control. Next is sight alignment and sight picture. Sight alignment refers to the correct positioning of the shooter's eye in the rifle's scope. So you want to make sure the shooter's eye is perfectly aligned with the scope's optical axis. So there are two things that go on here. One, you need to make sure that scope is mounted correctly and that it is actually set up so that where that bullet is flying, that scope is aligned to. And on the graphic on the bottom here, you can see, okay, if that scope's reticle and the rifle itself, where that bullet is coming out of, are not perfectly aligned, it doesn't matter how accurately you aim, you're going to consistently miss the same spot every time. So it takes a lot of practice to make sure that you've got that scope aligned perfectly and you've got it zeroed exactly where you want it perfectly. Oftentimes, we use vices for this. You put them in a vise. There are tons of different techniques to do. There are lasers you can use this for. I mean, tons of different things. But once you've got that scope mounted perfectly and it's aligned with the bore of that rifle, then you need to practice on your own sight alignment, sight picture. Again, when you're staring through that scope, one of the mistakes people make is they don't focus on ensuring they don't have shadow around that scope. If you have a shadow on one side of that scope when you're looking through it, you're going to be shooting to the other side of that shadow. And you can notice that when you start looking at the target. So practicing, making sure you've got appropriate eye relief from that scope, making sure you've got appropriate eye relief almost universally, unless you get into really hard recoiling scopes for really hard recoiling rifles. They're typically 3 to 3.5 inch eye relief. And getting practice being right behind that is really important. Making sure you've got a good stock weld on your cheek and you're comfortable and you rest it and your eye rests the same position every time behind that scope is really critical to ensuring that you've got good sight alignment and sight picture. And that really is, important. Now, parallax is kind of an interesting concept. And what parallax means is you've got the 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 target is focused on a different plane than your eye. Okay, so parallax is a big issue that we have in scopes. First focal plane scopes, you don't see it that much. They're more expensive. Second focal plane scopes, you'll see it, but they oftentimes will have a parallax adjustment on the side. So you'll notice as you increase the magnification, oftentimes you'll have to refocus it, and that's fine. But again, making sure you've got good sight alignment, sight picture. It's often interesting to me when people shoot. One of the things I like to tell them, and I'll cover this again, is you use your eye to acquire the target, but when you actually get ready to shoot, what you do is you change your focus to the reticle. And the reason you do that is because if you're focusing on that bullseye, you have a tendency to do what we call burning the bullseye or burning the target. And I'll show you an example of this in just a second. Okay, as we were talking about just a second ago, chasing the bullseye or target. When you acquire the target, you acquire it with your shooting eye. And then as you're getting ready to shoot, you then change your focus to the reticle itself, not the target. So you're focused on the reticle. And what that does is it prevents you from chasing that bullseye. And as you can see here, you can oftentimes tell when somebody's chasing that bullseye. And what happens is kind of a psychological, subconscious thing that you do. You will focus on that bullseye so much that you'll make these micro adjustments trying to get that reticle just perfectly. And you can see that you'll shoot all around that bullseye without actually hitting it there. So you acquire the bullseye with the eye, then you pull back to the reticle before you shoot, right before you shoot. It's a little counterintuitive, but it does work. Now, once again, breath control, natural respiratory pause. When I went to sniper school, I remember the sniper instructors asked everybody out there, and they said, how many of you know how to shoot? And of course, everybody raised their hands. And they said, how many of you learned to shoot from your dad, your uncle, whomever? And we all raised our hands. They said, forget everything they taught you. We're going to teach you how to shoot differently. And I thought, oh boy, here we go. I will tell you, I've taught a lot of people how to shoot over the years. I prefer to teach women. And the reason for that is, and I make a joke about this, but men seem to think that, because they're men, they have this innate ability to shoot. And the women I've taught how to shoot, a lot of them have never really shot. And they just go out there like, tell me what to do and I'll do it. And you go out and you're like, do X, Y, and Z. Man, they pick it up right away and they do it perfectly. Breath control and breathing is one of the most critical aspects of shooting a rifle well. Okay, much more important than shooting a pistol, but certainly shooting a rifle, because that rifle is a part of your body, and so breath control is critical. Now, you will hear people say you should, take half a breath in and hold it, or this or that. I disagree with that. The way I was taught to shoot, and the way that the Marine Corps Sniper School taught me to shoot, and the way I still believe today, and the way I shoot today, is by using what's called the NRP, or the natural respiratory pause. And if you've ever exhaled, and you can try it right now, that just brief second before you start the inhalation, that's actually what they call the natural respiratory pause. That is where you've got the least amount of air in your lungs. They're not completely empty, because as long as you're alive, you still have residual air in your lungs, but it's where you have the least amount of air in your lungs. And it's right before you inhale again. Now, the reason that's important is if your lungs are full, your chest tends to get more tight and it amplifies your heartbeat. So, not only does it amplify your heartbeat, but your muscles get tighter and it makes it harder to shoot. So when you exhale and you shoot at that NRP, you can be more relaxed. Your heart rate is not as amplified in your chest. Your muscles are not as tight. Now, if you're in good shape, you can extend this up to 15 seconds. What they teach you in sniper school is you want to try to get that shot off between 3 and 7 seconds, because after about 7 seconds, your heart rate's going to start rising, right? If you can't get it off within about 7 seconds, at least back when I was taught, then what you do is you take a couple of deep breaths, pull your eye out of the scope for a second, and you go back. Now, that's in a perfect world, obviously. In the real world of combat and things like that, you just do what you have to do. But out on the range, in a perfect world and perfect conditions, You take 3 to 7 seconds. If you can't get it off, take a couple of deep breaths, get back in that scope. The other thing, when we were talking about sight alignment and sight picture, staring through optics for hours on end gives you a ton amount of eye strain. I wear glasses now. I never had to wear them until I was 45, but my right eye, from staring through scopes for years and years, is much, much worse than my left eye because I've had so much eye strain on it over the years. So the other thing you want to do is, when you're looking through that at the target and you're getting ready to shoot, you don't want to spend 3 minutes staring, downrange, at that target through one eye. You want to try to only spend about 15 seconds staring, getting ready to shoot in focused kind of concentration. If you can't do it, take your eye out of that scope for a second, give it a little bit of a breather, take a couple of breaths, go back in there. Otherwise, you get a lot of eye strain, and you'll notice your eye will start moving a little bit. So again, breath control takes a lot of practice. Natural respiratory pause. That's where you want to shoot. Bang. Then you take the breath. It takes a little bit of practice, but that's where you want to bring. That's where you want to shoot. Now, this is what they used to teach in the Marine Corps. I don't know if they still do, but it's a great acronym to learn. And that's Otto at the bottom, showing perfect technique. He was a spotter at this time, but again, Otto was always the greatest shooter. I mean, there's a story. Some guys are out hunting with him one day. I wasn't there, but I have no doubt, because these guys were all snipers, and they were telling the story. They're out at his farm in Virginia, and he saw a deer running. And I guess he whipped around with a 270 and shot it on the run at like 600 yards on the run. I mean, that does take a bit of luck, certainly, but the deer's running, and he still manages to get it at 600 yards running. That's the kind of shooter that Otto was. The other thing this guy could do, unbelievable. Like, he was the point man for our sniper team. He was my spotter, but he was also the point man. And boy, you want to talk about field skills. We could be out there in the middle of nowhere, and all of a sudden he would halt us. He'd freeze us. And man, nothing could get by him. He had eyes like a hawk. He could see anything moving. I mean, absolutely amazing field skills. And that comes from a man that has spent his entire life out in the woods and just has natural field craft skills. I mean, absolutely amazing. But anyways, this is what they teach in the Marine Corps. It's a good acronym to learn how to shoot and to kind of go through your mind. And they call it BRASS F. BRASS F. So the first thing you do is you breathe. Take some breaths, right? You relax, like we were talking about. You breathe, you relax. You aim, get your eye in there. You squeeze, and they teach you to say it this way to yourself. Squeeze the trigger. You shoot. That shot should always surprise you. If it doesn't surprise you and you're anticipating, there's a chance you're going to buck, you're going to jerk, you're going to, anticipate the recoil or something. And then you always follow through to see where you hit, and you should be ready for the follow-on shot, right? BRASS F, breathe, relax, aim, squeeze the trigger, shoot, and follow through. It sounds simplistic. Again, we Marines, we eat crayons, so we need things explained to us in very simplistic terms, but it does work. And I still use it to this day when I go shooting. Inside my head, I teach myself this, or I say this to myself: breathe, relax, aim, squeeze the trigger, shoot, follow through. So maybe just kind of a little mnemonic device you can use to help you kind of go out there and kind of go through the whole process of what to do. Common trigger mistakes. You can find these online. We're not going to talk about them all here. I could spend hours talking about these, but there are a bunch of them: jerking, yanking, bucking, flinching, milking. I mean, there's a whole bunch, and they will show you. You can find these online. Just look them up, and they can show you on the target what to identify when you start looking at your target, what you may be doing. Now, it's important to remember these will be reversed if you're left-handed versus right-handed. Okay, so if you're right-handed and you're bucking, anticipating the recoil on a right-handed rifle, you're likely going to be shooting down into the bottom. If you're left-handed, you're going to be shooting down to the left in the bottom or something like that. So it's going to be reversed if you're left or right-handed. You can find these charts all over the internet. They're very handy. Trigger control. The important thing to remember with the trigger: first third of your trigger finger, first third pad of the trigger finger. Again, light touch, squeeze directly to the rear. Squeeze directly to the rear. You're not jerking it. You're not yanking it. You're not pulling it. You're squeezing directly to the rear. And the recoil should always surprise you. One of the things that I see with newer shooters is they want to go out and get the newest, biggest caliber they can. 338 Lapua, something like that. First of all, a lot of those are overkill. People will often ask me and say, "Hey, Chris, what's the best rifle?" And I go, "Well, I don't know. What's the best tool in your toolbox? What are you trying to do?" Or they'll say, "What's the best caliber?" I'm like, "I don't know. Again, what's the best hammer you have?" I went to Africa. I went hunting in Africa about 5 years ago with Bill, who's going to be on here in a couple of days. I took a 30-06. If you don't know, the 30-06 is called a 30-06 because it's a 30 caliber rifle that was, or cartridge that was patented in 1906. This cartridge now is nearly 120 years old. I took it to Africa, did a great job with it. He took a 270. A lot of people might say that 270 is too small to take to Africa. He took a 600 pound, nearly 600 pound kudu with a 270. It's all about shot placement. So I will see a lot of beginners go out there and really just want to get on the bandwagon of the latest, greatest, newest hot cartridge. Two challenges with that. One, getting ammo becomes a challenge. And two, you're oftentimes going to spend a heck of a lot of money if you can find the ammo to shoot with it. And then I would say the last thing is oftentimes, if you're getting these big hot cartridges like a 338 Lapua, which I love the round, if you can shoot past, 1,500 yards consistently. If your range goes to 500 yards, one, that 338 Lapua, if you're not shooting with the muzzle brake, is going to beat the hell out of you. And two, it's going to break the bank. You're spending, $3.50 a round for match ammo. It's expensive. I would recommend, go get a 6.5 Creedmoor, get a 308, go get something like that. Hell, go get a 223 and go spend your money on ammo you can afford in hours behind that rifle. Don't go out there and get something, especially if you're not used to shooting, hard-hitting rifles. If you learn on something that has a heavy recoil, you're not going to learn to shoot well. I'm not recoil sensitive, but I tell you what, 300 Win Mag is nothing to mess around with. 338 Win Mag, I've got a 375 Ruger. That thing will knock you into next week. If you're recoil sensitive and you're not used to shooting a rifle like that, and that's what you're learning on, you're going to become recoil sensitive very quickly. So again, trigger mistakes. Remember, squeeze straight to the rear. And really, that kind of finishes what I was going to talk about today. Kind of a short podcast, but I had a lot of folks that were reaching out just saying, "Hey, tell me about some shooting." And I cannot recommend enough that, if you want to support efforts like this, I don't make any money from these podcasts. I just enjoy doing them. And I'm really honored and humbled by the fact that people actually listen to my ramblings and my inane ramblings, if you will. You can always support. Again, you can check out my blog, globalriskinfo.com. I do a lot of speaking on risk management. Cybersecurity is really what I do for a living, but it's nice to get on here and be able to talk about things like being a sniper, recon Marine, infantry Marine, stuff like that. But if you want to try to support our community, again, Marine Reconnaissance Foundation, reconfoundation.org, or Recon Sniper Foundation.org is another great place you can go to just help, our brothers. They have helped a tremendous number of brothers and sisters that have really been in need over the years, with bills, and loved ones have passed, with funeral expenses, with getting hotels and flights, grocery time, medical expenses. Life happens and it does come fast. I can't reiterate enough, 22 veterans a day commit suicide in the United States. If you were to look at those, and I'm not saying it's just recon, Marine, sniper, stuff like that, but if you were to look at any combat arms, certainly in special operations type work, whether it's Rangers, Special Forces, SEALs, recon, Marine, snipers, whatever, that number goes up significantly. And we've lost a number of our own. So, if you can find it in yourself to support an organization like that, it really does go to a good cause. But with that being said, this is just right at 30 minutes, and certainly appreciate everybody that listened again. We're going to have a great guest coming up. His name is Doc Bill Brown, and he spent, I think about 24 years in the Navy as a senior chief. He was a recon instructor with me. He was a Special Amphibious Reconnaissance Corpsman. If you don't know what that is, you're going to learn. But he's a Special Forces trained medic. He was a military free fall instructor. He was in Iraq. He's got an absolutely amazing history, and one of the funniest people you'll ever meet. And huge man. He went hunting with me in Africa And Deadeye Doc, he can outshoot me every day of the week. He's not a sniper, but absolutely a great shooter and a fun person. So look forward to having him on, and you guys can look forward to that podcast. It should be a heck of a lot of fun. So thanks again for everybody for tuning in, and look forward to the next podcast. Thank you.